What's up, everybody? Welcome back inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Welcome back to spring practice to the Ohio State football team, because after a week off, spring break, Ohio State just threw 2 practices, now back in this football facility for spring practice. Pro Day is upon us now. That's the 40 vet Tim May. That's Andy Backstrom. This is a practice report presented by Byers Auto. Fellas, didn't get to watch any practice today. Just heard from Ryan Day after the Buckeyes returned from spring break. Had their first padded practice. It actually is starting to feel like spring ball now that the calendar has flipped actually to spring, and Ohio State's back in the building. Tim, big takeaway from Ryan Day as you heard from him today.
Well, number one, I'm hoping we don't get hit by a deep ball from C.J. Stroud, because he and his fleet of receivers are running through their script for tomorrow's Pro Day, which is going to be cool, including watching possibly the number 1 draft pick for 2024, Marvin Harrison Jr., catch some balls tomorrow. But I digress. Big takeaway was, I was on the same wavelength as several other reporters, only from the standpoint of I got called on late, but what are you seeing from these quarterbacks? Because that's the question number one on everyone's brain, and what you've ascertained from what Ryan Day had to say, which is no surprise, is he's going to see a lot more from them on Saturday than he's seen yet, meaning the scrimmage is coming up on Saturday, and he likes the way both of these guys have dealt with things so far. They're both showing some aggressiveness, throwing the ball down the field, etc. So that's my initial takeaway, because I just went for the low-hanging fruit.
Andy?
Yeah, Ryan Day was asked, beyond the quarterback position, what is the next priority, or what's the next position group that you're focused on? He said offensive line 1 and then secondary 2. And I think that makes sense, right, from what happened last season, and then the turnover with the offensive line. And he talked about it's tough at this point. This is the first padded practice, as Spencer mentioned. So with the offensive line, it's tough to judge. He was asked about the right tackle battle, and even in the inside and the interior of the offensive line, it's really hard to evaluate these guys until you get into a game-like situation. We will have that on Saturday as they do scrimmage, and you'll get to see these guys as a 5 in a unit. But I think until then, Ryan Day is kind of reserving, or at least what he's telling us is he's reserving his judgment until they get into that game-like scenario.
My big takeaway is that everything this week is a momentum builder for Saturday. When he talked about quarterbacks, when he talked about offensive line, he talked about secondary, he mentioned the linebackers getting reps without Tommy Eichenberg being out here. He talked about wide receivers, trying to see them a little more. Not a lot of running back chatter, but the spring practice, that's a lot of individual stuff. Everything went back to, well, we'll have to see Saturday. What does that tell me? That tells me that everything that they do Tuesday and Thursday is a audition for what coaches expect to see from you on Saturday. These next 2 practices and pads set the tone, set the expectations for what Saturday is, and then they can watch the film after Saturday and actually start to put together a spring depth chart.
Yeah, that only makes sense because you want to watch, final analysis, even with the quarterbacks. You want to see them play real football as close as you can get it, which is an extended scrimmage situation. And like I even asked him, it's like, how do you start judging these quarterbacks even right now? Because as intense as these practices are going to be, they're still wearing black jerseys. Yeah. They're still not in jeopardy of getting hit. Or if you do hit them, boy, you would suffer some consequences. And he goes, that just comes from doing it as long as he's done it from the standpoint of judging quarterbacks. Because fellas, I keep reminding everybody, Corey Dennis is very much involved. Obviously, he's the quarterback coach. Brian Hartline, the new offensive coordinator, is going to be involved in identifying the starter. But the starting quarterback on almost every football team finally is determined by the head coach. And we know Ryan Day has a lot of experience in the realm of judging quarterbacks. So I get back to this. He seems to be very impressed with Devin Brown and Cal McCord and their approach to this competition so far. But like you said, the next couple of days in pads, when it's real football, and then the scrimmage is really going to maybe create some separation, maybe not, who knows.
It seems to be this balance between wanting to find their extraordinary traits, which he mentioned. He wouldn't tell us what those traits are, but he says he started to identify those from Devin Brown and Kyle McCord. But he also says they don't need to do too much. They don't need to be superheroes, I think he said earlier this spring. And I think that's the balance. When you have so many guys coming back in that offense, so many weapons at wide receiver, running back, and even talent at offensive line that they're hoping pans out this spring, they don't need them to do it all.
Yeah.
So they just need to do the right things well, and they can't turn the ball over, which you mentioned a ton.
Yeah.
So
and this is the thing, I'm going to be watching on Saturday. Our belief is Devin Brown's is a little bit better runner, a little bit more dynamic in that regard. Kyle McCord's a little bit more of a pocket presence, but can move around a little bit. What you're going to be watching is, does Devin Brown press the run button too quickly, or does Kyle McCord stand in there too long? Both of those can be sins, in a quarterback when you're evaluating quarterbacks. And as I've told you guys a million times, when you're deciding on a starting quarterback, the first thing you want to know is he going to run our play the way we've called it, the way it's designed? Is he going to exhaust that before he goes to plan B?
To his play.
Yeah, to his play. And so, and he was kind of giving you a little insight in that regard is what's going to set these guys apart is that plan B part. Seriously. But right now you want to see if they can run your offense.
Yep.
So it's really interesting the way you go about finding starting quarterbacks. And like he said, it's almost a gut check sometimes on who you pick, but then number two, you don't really know until the first half against Minnesota 2 years ago when everybody wanted C.J. Stroud out of there, you know what I mean? And the second half he played well, but the point is you don't ever really know until the lights really come on and it's live hitting.
Yeah, they won't know until they play at Indiana. It's kind of ironic, Tim, that 2 years apart.
But you got to send somebody out there, right?
Two years apart, they're going to play a Big Ten road game to start the season with a brand new quarterback.
Yeah.
We all didn't know how that would go with CJ. I think it turned out pretty well for these Buckeyes. And, we'll see how it turns out for them with either Kyle McCord or Devin Brown. And this is why, I don't want to say that I've beat the drum, but I've expected Kyle McCord to end up being the starter, even more so than I think you two have, is because when Ryan Day talks about those little things and making sure that you understand the offense and doing all of those things before you get to that extraordinary and being able to run the offense, it just seems like there's a calmness about Kyle McCord where he doesn't get rattled. And Lettermen Row covered this extensively the first time we ever talked to Kyle McCord. Then we turned around and covered it extensively again the first time we talked to Devin Brown. Those two just seemed like pros from day one. Right when we talked to him the very first time, he's like, man, this guy's impressive. This guy's a pro. Well, now you're seeing that. When Ryan Day says that this quarterback battle, they've both handled it really well so far, that doesn't surprise anybody who's been around these two at all because we know exactly what they are. So I just think that's all of these things are coming together to make this a pretty fascinating battle. Again, I do think that it will be Kyle McCord eventually, but Saturday is going to go a long way in telling that. And then the following Saturday at Student Appreciation Day, when it's a real, we see a lot that day as well as this upcoming Saturday. You're going to know a lot in the next 10 to 12 days. You're going to have a really good grasp of who's going to be the starter at Ohio State.
Yeah, and you're going to know a little bit more about maybe the play calling situation. He was talking about today, Ryan Day, was that Brian Hartline's probably going to get a shot on Saturday. He didn't commit to that hard, but it seems like he's going to get a shot to call plays, and he said you can't really evaluate that play calling experience until you've been in a game-like situation, and that's what Saturday is going to be for all intents and purposes. So we're going to get to see a little bit of that and see how that pans out, and that's kind of a process that we need to follow the whole offseason, really, because that's going to be really determining if Ryan Day is going to stick to this roaming, more head coach, CEO type role that he's talked about taking, because it's a totally possibility that he shifts back into that play calling role.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I mean, think about the play calling. I'm not saying it's overrated, because it's not. But like Ryan Day indicated today, I mean, you really evaluate that when you get into a real game and it's 3rd and 4 for the 4th straight drive. And what do you call it? You know what I mean? I mean that's where it gets into the nitty gritty. Out here, you're calling plays. You know what I mean? This isn't like, this to a certain extent a continuum, perhaps on drives and stuff. But right now, what you're trying to hone is, okay, Brian, we got to have a play right now. You know what I mean? I mean, timing is what you're looking for in this regard of how quickly can you assess what's going on down in distance, and how quickly do you get that call out to whomever it is that's signaling it in. Like we know, their signaling in core looks like the deck of an aircraft carrier. Guys in different colors, doing different things, signaling to different position groups and stuff. So it's quite the conveyance, and that's when you'll. But like you said, the games are when you really evaluate play calling, but the games are in the season. So,
in an ideal world, fellas, I think the bottom line is that Ryan Day and Brian Hartline would have probably preferred to just have Hartline call the plays in the first game of the year, not mention it to anybody, and then say afterward, yeah, Brian's the play caller now, because now they're set up where Ryan Day's already mentioned that he wants to give up play calling. He wants to, but he's like, Brian Hartline needs to prove it. Well, if things go south or sideways this spring, then he has to take that back over. That's going to be a bad look for this offense in general.
Yeah.
And if he gives it up and just mentions, hey, I already gave it up, and then things go really, really well for the entire season, you say, oh, why didn't you give it up, a couple years ago? And so I just think that, it's not a great spot for them to be in, to be honest, and I think it's a little overrated right now. I'm not saying that it's not important at all to ask Ryan Day in there about it.
I agree with you.
But here's the deal, like, if Indiana obviously is going to be a rocking crowd. I'm not trying to get too in the weeds here, but like Indiana's going to be a rocking crowd. Let's say Indiana takes the ball first, goes down and scores, up 7-0. You get a 4th and 2 from the 41-yard line, and Brian Hartline dials up a play. It's like, you can't simulate that in a game. In a practice, on the road, down early, you need a play. Like, you cannot simulate that. On the scoreboard, sometimes Quinn Temple will get on the microphone and say, hey, it's 3rd and 4, and you just went from 1st and 20 to 3rd and 4, with just one play because you're simulating situations. You can't simulate games. And so the spring, obviously Brian Hartline can try to make himself into a rhythmic play caller like Ryan Day is, but you're not going to be able to script a game and understand the down and distance and situation. Hey, this guy, Emeka Buka just caught a pass here. He's a little tired after catching one over the middle. Maybe he's not on the field here, but in practice he really is. So I just think that right now that entire conversation is I think it's taken up a little bit too much oxygen for the third practice of spring.
But the only reason it is because it's interesting.
For sure.
Ryan Day stepping back. But one of the reasons Ryan Day is giving up that play calling duty probably is because, like he explained, and this is what you're talking about, he wants to be more of that roaming head coach, as I keep calling it, because it used to be you'd climb up in a tower, with a megaphone, in the old days. He wants to be that roaming head coach, which means he's not going to be as immersed into the offensive game planning, and he thinks the guy who's calling the plays should be there from day one, which is Sunday. Well, maybe Saturday night, the way these guys do things, but Sunday when you're game planning for the upcoming opponent the next Saturday and stuff. And the other thing is, yes, 4th and 2. What are you going to call here? Well, he's not pulling play. He's not going to be pulling a play out of his rear pocket. What do you think I was going to say? He's not going to be pulling a play out of his rear pocket. There'll be you have a list of things you can go to. You might be bold and I'm going to call play 4 here instead of play 1, but you understand that too. That's why I really do think there is a lot of oxygen being wasted on this, because it's and like you said, Ryan Day, I don't think is going to be driving around with his eyes in the rearview mirror. Oh, boy, I wish I'd done this 3 years ago. He is pressed forward. That's what sports is all about, is playing who you're playing. But yeah, I agree. I think Brian Hartline's going to do a fine job. That's my early opinion. Just like we have early opinions of who's going to be the starting quarterback. But game 4, 8, 7, game 4, 7, 8 will tell the difference.
And that's why, Andy, it is important, even if we're probably wasting a little bit too much time on it, it is important to get the play calling correct, because if you don't, then you have this Ferrari of an offense and you're not getting the play calling correct. So it is important to already be focusing on, but maybe not as important as we're making it. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's overrated until it isn't.
Exactly.
If things go south, then obviously it's something to talk about. And if there's any time to talk about
it,
it's now, when there isn't a whole lot going on outside of that. But I do think there is this shift towards more delineation of responsibility within the program. We even heard today about Tim Walton picking up another title on his job and basically being the pass defense coordinator. And it seems like they want to have all efforts to having the secondary meet as together as one unit. And that is another position that Ryan Day is focused on, of really making sure that they shore up the issues that we saw towards the end of last season. There was even a question asked about the nickel spot and how does that have to be a safety this coming season, because a lot of times that's the position that we saw, that 4-2-5, 3 safeties. And he said that's more byproduct of injuries, and they would like to have their third best cover corner in that slot. So it seems like the secondary, next to quarterback and offensive line, is really the third priority here. And I don't know if there's even an order, because all of them are extremely important.
Just by job title, I would think there's more pressure on Tim Walton than there is Brian Hartline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, oh my goodness, when you look at what really, in the final analysis, nailed this team, last year.
Corners.
It was pass defense.
Cornerbacks.
It was screw ups in coverage or blown coverages. It only takes 4 or 5, to ruin your day, so to speak.
Ruin your season, Tim.
Well, your season, yeah. I think that was understood.
Tim, I'm looking at I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm looking at a Big Ten championship banner from 2019. I don't see one from 2022 in here.
Yeah.
And if the safeties and corners played better against Michigan, I think we're probably looking at that and maybe even a national championship banner in here.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. So that, to me, is the job one, because I think this offense is going to be pretty good. I mean, I think they've got 2 capable quarterbacks. Well, Jebbia is a guy who's played too. So they got 3 capable quarterbacks, but 2 I think are a cut above. And but the offensive line, if they get that figured out, which I think they will. But yeah, you can't be giving up those huge plays. And so that's pretty funny when you brought up the job titles there.
Well, and they keep, Ryan Day's mentioned a lot in his first couple of weeks about the corners. He's been really impressed with the corners. Denzel Burke has been mentioned. Davidson Igbenogson has been mentioned. Jordan Hancock's been mentioned. And I think he's made a really concerted effort to talk about they've been making plays on the ball, which is something that, we don't get a whole lot from these press conferences, but he's mentioned that a couple times now, and I think that's noteworthy.
But every time I hear that, you know what I think?
Well, what does that mean for the quarterbacks?
Maybe the ball isn't getting thrown exactly where it needs to be thrown. So go back to the quarterback situation.
Yeah, that's the problem with spring practice. Who's actually playing well, the defense or the offense? But I do think that it's noteworthy because this is a group of corners that had 0 interceptions last year, and they need to force more turnovers. I mean, that was a big problem last year. If you look at the turnover count, a chunk of them came in 2 games, and aside from that, you really had this big disparity. And if you're going to try to win big games, yes, you need stops, but you also need game-changing plays on defense, and it starts in the secondary.
Yeah, and take JT Tuimoloau out, defensive end. You take the Penn State game out of his resume from last year, it's not that great. You know what I mean? I mean, he's getting pressure. Yeah, I'm talking about from a number standpoint. The chunk of his big-time plays came in 1 game. You got to get a little more consistency from that aspect. Moving Jack Sawyer down, as we talked about, I'm interested in watching him on Saturday. Jack Sawyer, as a true defensive end, does he step up and take the bit like they think he will? You know what I mean? Because last year, it looked like he was in a washing machine sometimes, the way his head was turning to a certain extent. Maybe a little bit uncomfortable, maybe a lot uncomfortable with trying to play a little bit of the Jack situation. But turning him and JT Tuimoloau loose from each end, I think is going to maybe do wonders for this defensive front, for example. So they're all kinds of things. And then you keep in your mind, well, wait a minute, these guys are going to be going against 2 first-time-ish possible starting tackles.
Well, I'm going to cut you off there because we're not going to talk about offensive line today. Yeah. A lot covered as we come back into the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Obviously, we're pretty excited to be back. The Buckeyes are excited to be back after a spring break. Didn't mean to cut Tim off there, but we've got offensive line, defensive line coming on Thursday. We're going to talk to offensive linemen and defensive linemen Thursday. We're going to save that conversation for Thursday afternoon. Pro Day tomorrow. We'll be back in here, full coverage at lettermenrow.com, where we cover Ohio State all year round. Come get that deal, $30 until August. That's a hell of a deal. You get all the way through training camp. The whole entire quarterback battle will be settled by the time that deal expires. Andy Baxter will be there. Tim May will be there. I'm just Spencer Holbrook. We'll all 3 be there. Come hang out with us in the Letterman Lounge. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like this video. We will see you back in here on Wednesday for Ohio State Pro Day.